Today I'm going to do my last talk on the second coming, and today I want to compare it with the rapture. It's always worrying when the week before you're going to talk about a subject, the person gets up and says that they're going to talk about the same subject. You wonder how much of your material they're going to pinch, as it were. Well, last week I'm glad to say Michael went off on a completely different path to what I'm going to go off on today, and he only quoted about one or two passages that I intend to quote. So these are some of the differences between the rapture and the second coming. The first difference is that the rapture is the translation of all believers. The second coming is the translation of no believers. Turn to 1 Thessalonians 4, we will see this is what it says in verse 13. But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren. Don't ever join a church that's called the ignorant brethren. It's forbidden by the Bible. Concerning them which are asleep, that you are sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if you believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them which are asleep, a euphemism for death, will God bring with him. For this is what we say unto you, by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not precede them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a... And if you've got the authorized here, it says shout. That's incorrect. You should say what the American Standard says, command. It's actually the command of a military leader. That's what the word means. And the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God. Now this isn't Donald Trump that he's talking about here. Neither is it the trumpet sound that's in the book of Revelation, the 7 trumpets. This is written over 40 years before the book of Revelation. The last trump was the very last sound that they made on the day of trumpets. And the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up. The Greek word here is harpazo. It means to be taken or snatched by a very strong, powerful, or even violent force. I don't think it'll be a violent force, but it'll be a very strong, powerful one. Together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Okay. So the second thing is translated saints go to heaven, 1 Thessalonians 4 verse 17, so we shall ever be with the Lord. Translated saints go to the earth in the second coming, 1 Thessalonians 3 verse 13. To the end he may establish your heart unblameable in holiness before God, even our Father, of the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ with all his saints. They're different. In one he comes for them, in the other he comes with them. If I go to catch a bus, the bus comes for me. I take the bus and I get to the bus station, now the bus is coming with me. They're two different events. You turn over to Zechariah 14 verse 5. After Jesus descended on the Mount of Olives, and it says, and you shall flee through the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal. Yes, you shall flee like you did in the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. And the Lord my God shall come, and all the... Now you should have the words holy ones there, not saints, holy ones, with you. The holy ones, all the saints are in heaven, but they're also all the angelic beings that are in heaven. And they will all come back with Jesus at the second coming. The next difference, number 3, is the earth is not judged at the rapture. The earth is judged at the second coming. Turn to Matthew 25 verse 31. When the Son of Man shall come in all his glory, that's the Shekinah glory, and all the holy angels with him, notice it says all the holy angels, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all the Gentiles, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from his goats. Why isn't he judging the Jews? Because according to Ezekiel, no Jew is going to survive the Great Tribulation unless they become a believer in Jesus. It's God's intention to weed them all out. Zechariah also talks about the same thing. Number 4, imminence. It means it can happen at any moment. You don't have to have a specific sign to happen before it. That's the rapture. There are quite definite signs before the second coming, including the Great Tribulation. Number 5, the rapture is not predicted anywhere in the Old Testament. The second coming is. Turn to Isaiah 63, verses 1 to 6. Remember, the believing Jews in the middle of the Great Tribulation flee into Petra, Jordan, or what in the Bible is called Bozrah in Edom. Who is this that cometh from Edom with dyed garments from Bozrah? He that is glorious in apparel, travelling in the greatness of his strength. I shall speak in righteousness, mighty to save. The one who's coming is Jesus. Wherefore are you red in your apparel and your garments, like him that treadeth in the wine vat? He goes on to tell you. The reason why is because he's just killed loads and loads of people. He's going to kill all the armies of the Antichrist. He's even going to kill the Antichrist. Look at what it says in verse 4, the day of vengeance. It's the day of vengeance when God is going to take vengeance against all the ungodly on the earth. Now a lot of people will get confused. And if you go to Zechariah 14, if you ask lots of people where the first place is that Jesus is going to land when he comes back, they'll tell you it's the Mount of Olives. It's not. First place he's going to land is in Bozrah. So why do they say that? Well, one is because in Zechariah 14 it talks about it. Verses 3 and 4. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle, and his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem to the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof towards the east and the west, and there shall be a great valley, and half of the mountain shall be moved towards the north and half towards the south. There's actually already a great big split in the Mount of Olives. In 1927 there was an earthquake in Israel, and the geologists went and checked on the damage afterwards and found that a split had appeared in the Mount of Olives. It's already there, it's just waiting for Jesus to come back to split completely. Now if you turn back to Zechariah 12 verse 17. Sorry, verse 7 I should say. Verse 17. The Lord also shall save the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah. The tents of Judah is a Hebrew idiom that means the Jews living outside of the land. And the Jews that live outside the land at that stage that he's talking about are the ones who flee in the middle of the Great Tribulation. In Matthew 24, verse 15, it says that when you see the abomination of desolation, that's the time to get out of the land. And they see that in the middle of the Great Tribulation. If you don't know what the abomination of desolation is, it's two things. First of all, it's the Antichrist going up into the tribulation temple and being worshipped as if he was God. 2 Thessalonians 2 talks about that. Revelation 13 also talks about that. And secondly, he erects an image. He does the same thing that Nebuchadnezzar did in Daniel 3. He erects an image and expects everybody to worship him. That is what the abomination of desolation is. They were told to get out when they see that in the middle of the Great Tribulation. And Revelation 12 talks about how they get out, and it even tells you that God nourishes them where they go to. Where do they go to? Petra in Jordan. So he's going to save the tents of Judah first because they are the ones who obeyed what he told them to do. There is number one. Another reason why people believe this is Acts 1 verse 11. In Acts 1 verse 11 it says this, men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing up? This same Jesus who you've seen ascend into heaven will come again in like manner. In what manner did he go? The cloud of heaven. He's coming back in the clouds of heaven. It says manner. It's amazing how many people seem to think there that it says place. It doesn't. He does come to the Mount of Olives, but not until he's been to Bozrah first. Okay. Number 6. Believers only are raptured. 1 Thessalonians 4 verse 16. The second coming affects all mankind. Acts 17 verse 31. There it says that God has appointed a time in which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained. That man who he hath ordained. Which person of the Godhead is a man? The second person. He's the Son of God. He became a man. He still is a man. Many Bible theologians call him the God-man. He's both fully man and fully God to this very day. And when he comes again, he's going to come back and he's going to be fully man and fully God. And he's going to judge the world as a man. He was only as a man that he was tempted to do all the things that the world would do. In John 5 verse 22, he says that the Father has handed over all judgment to the Son, thereby showing us that it's Jesus who judges people. Number 7, the rapture will happen before the day of wrath. We've got time to look at that. The second coming includes the day of wrath. It's the end of the day of wrath, the day of wrath being the Great Tribulation. Number 8, there's no reference at all to Satan to do with rapture, but there is to do with the second coming. Revelation 20 verse 1. I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the keys of the bottomless pit, also called the abyss and the deep in the Bible, and a great chain in his hand. And he took hold of the dragon, who is Satan, in the book of Revelation, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. So he's going to be found for 1,000 years in the abyss. The abyss being one of the 4 places in Sheol. Number 9. Christ comes for his own at the rapture, but he comes with his own at the second coming. In Acts 14 it says this: "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go and prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where you are, I will be also." At this stage, Thomas interjects and says, "How can we know where you're going? If we don't know where you're going, how can we know the way?" And he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father but through me." How come today the church is embracing into faith? Jesus said that he and he alone could bring salvation. Acts 4 verse 12, Peter said, "There is no other name under heaven and earth by which you can be saved." Christianity excludes all other religions. And when the nations worshipped other gods, in Psalm 96, it said, "The gods of the nations are El Elohim, demons of deception." That's why demonic spirits are helping Satan. They're seeking to deceive the world. Believe anything as long as it's not the truth. So that is the teaching about that. The other thing about that is where it says "receive you unto myself," the Greek word can also mean take. I will take you unto myself, that where I am, which is in heaven, you will be also. This is an argument for the pre-tribulational view of the rapture. That is not going to happen with a post-tribulation view. He comes into the air, they come up to him, and then he comes down to the ground. What's the sense of them going up in the air? Why don't they just wait for him to come, if that's really the truth about the matter? Jesus did not say, "Where you are, I'm going to be." He said, "Where I am, you're going to be." Good argument for the pre-trib view of the rapture. Number 12, only his own will see him. That's of the rapture. At the second coming, every eye will see him. Revelation 1 verse 7. Behold, he comes with the clouds, or the Greek can read cloud, and that's probably the way it should read. The cloud is one of 5 manifestations of what we call the Shekinah glory. If you don't know what the Shekinah glory is, God told Moses that nobody could see him as he really is, because if they did, they would die. That's Exodus 33 verse 20. How come then in Exodus 24 verse 10 it said that the people saw God? What they saw was a visible manifestation. Now, these visible manifestations come in one of 5 ways in the Old Testament. One is God becomes a man. The Lord appeared unto Abraham, Genesis 18 verse 1, as a man. The second is that he appears as a fire. Exodus 3, the burning bush. Exodus 19, the fire comes onto Mount Sinai. God's coming down to meet Moses. The smoke also appears in Exodus 19 on the mount. The smoke appears in the temple in Isaiah 6 when he gets his coal. Then we have light. That's what Saul saw, wasn't he? He saw the light of the Lord. And then we have cloud. And the cloud, according to Numbers 11 verse 25, led the Jews through the wilderness. When they followed the cloud, they were literally following the presence of God. And when they erected the tabernacle in Exodus 40, we see that the cloud comes into the tabernacle. It would have come into the Holy of Holies. Number 13, the tribulation begins after the rapture happens. After the second coming, the millennial kingdom begins. Although there is 75 days between Jesus coming and the millennial kingdom coming back. In a couple of talks' time, we'll talk about what happens in those 75 days. These are some of the errors that people make about the rapture. One, word rapture is not in the Bible. Nor is the word Trinity. So why do you believe in the Trinity if you're not believing in the rapture? Because it's not in the Bible. There aren't any English words in the Bible at all. The Bible was never written in English, so of course it's not in the Bible. The fact is that where does the word rapture come from? The word rapture originates from various different Latin words. Rapturo, rapere, rapio. The Bible wasn't written in Latin until 405 AD. In 382 they had a great big church meeting, and a man called Damases, who at the time was the Bishop of Rome, asked a Christian writer called Jerome to write a copy of the Bible in Latin. Well, a couple of years later Damases died, but Jerome went on writing. He took 23 years to translate it into Latin. It wasn't until 405 AD that it was translated into Latin. Then the word rapture does appear in the Bible. But the word rapture really appears in the Bible anyway, because the Greek equivalent to all these different Latin words is harpazo. That's the very word that appears in it. Right. No verse proves the pre-trib view. Well, that's a silly argument. No verse proves the partial rapture theory, the mid-trib view, the post-trib view, or the pre-Roth view. You should never use arguments that can be used against you. I was in the post office once, so I got to the post office, and this guy immediately leaped upon me. They were like the scribes and Pharisees with Jesus. They like to try to trip me up. And he said to me, Colin, would you agree with me, he said, that everything has always come from something else? That was his preposition. He thought I was being a chess player. I anticipated his next move. And I said, I knew what he was going to say. He was going to say, in that case, he thought I was going to say yes. He was going to say, well, where did God come from then? Who made him? So I didn't say that. I said, no. I said, how can everything possibly have come from something else? What did the first thing ever come from? Whatever was first, what did it come from? It couldn't possibly come from anything else, because there was nothing else for it to come from. I said, tell me what you believe came first, and explain to me how it came into being. And at that, the guy looked at me and walked away. I used his own argument against him. It's a good thing to do. Later on, I shall show you some of the reasons why we believe. It's not a case of, is there a verse that specifically says that? It's a case of you put all the evidence together and you come up with what seems like the most logical conclusion. what is the best evidence and what does it suggest? That's how you come to conclusions about the rapture. The third one is that it was invented by Darby and Schofield in about the 1820s. People who claim that have never studied seriously into the history of the rapture. Now, the man who I found best on this subject, you can go and see him on YouTube, is a man called Thomas Ice. He was the main speaker at the Bournemouth conference in 2011, and he seems to be more informed on it than anybody else on the planet. The earliest references we have to the rapture is actually called the Shepherd of Hermas, believed to have been written between 140 and 155 AD, and what's more, it seems to support a pre-tribulational view. The second one that we have is Victorinus. He was early 3rd century. In 374, a man called Erasmus, who was a bishop, I think he was the bishop of Antioch if I remember rightly, he wrote a book called The Antichrist, the Jews and the Great Tribulation. And throughout history, different people have written about it. Unfortunately, as time went on, they gradually started to talk less about it. What Darby and Schofield did was resurrect a teaching that had become talked about less and less. We've got the same in the church today. Most churches never even talk about the rapture. Don't know anything about it, and that's how it got to. And Schofield put notes about the rapture in his Bible, and he brought it back to people's attention. But it doesn't matter anyway. The thing is it biblical? Well, yes it is. In Genesis 5 it says that Enoch walked with God for 365 years. That's a lot of walking. You know, I was in the post office for 34 years, and I believe that I walked over 100,000 miles in those 34 years. But even I didn't walk as far as Enoch, because he walked for 365 years. Elijah, 2 Kings 2, didn't he get raptured into heaven? Then we have Jesus, Acts 1, verse 11. He's caught up with the clouds, he's taken off into heaven. Then we have Philip. Let's look at Philip, because something different happened to Philip. Acts 8, verses 38 to 40. And he commanded the chariot to stand still, and they went down both into the water, both Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. And when they were come up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord caught away Philip, that the eunuch saw him no more, and he went on his way rejoicing. But Philip was found at Azotus. Azotus is what was called Ashdod in the Old Testament. It's in the land of Philistia. It's in the land of the Gaza Strip today. Passing through, he preached to all the cities till he came to Caesarea. So he was raptured, but he was the only one who didn't get raptured into heaven. Revelation 4, verse 1. After this, I, that's John, looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was the voice, as it were, of a trumpet talking with me, which said to me, come up here, and I will show you the things which must come hereafter. Come up here. Jesus comes into the air with a command. I think the command is going to be come up here. Now we turn to Revelation 11, verses 11 and 12. Here we have the 2 witnesses who are murdered by the Antichrist in the middle of the Great Tribulation. But you can't keep a good man down, and they soon get resurrected. Verse 11. And after 3 days and a half, the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. Not surprising. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, come up here. Isn't that interesting? Same thing as it says about John. And they ascended up into heaven in the clouds, and their enemies beheld them. The fourth one is that we can predict the date of the rapture. Matthew 24, verses 36 to 44. But of that day and hour, no one knows. Now, how do we know it's talking about the rapture here? Well, it's quite simple. The word "de" in Greek is peri-de. Peri-de in Greek is what's known as a contrastive. It means that he's now going to change subject. He's contrasting what he's talked about with what he's now going to talk about. When he uses it in the epistles, it says, "but now concerning this." It denotes a change in subject. He's just been talking about the second coming, verses 29 to 31. So he can't be talking about the second coming. Otherwise the Holy Spirit doesn't know Greek grammar. He's talking about the rapture. No one knows, no one, not even the angels, but my Father only. Now this has led people to say, how can Jesus possibly not know something when he's God? The book of Philippians tells us something interesting about Jesus. It tells us that he made himself void of certain things when he came upon the earth. He couldn't have made himself void of the nature of God, because Colossians teaches that he was still fully God even when he became a man. So what did he make himself void of? Certain divine attributes. One attribute he made himself void of was omnipresence. God has the ability to be in all places at the same time. Jesus didn't have that ability any longer, or that attribute. You don't find him walking on the Sea of Galilee at the same time as he's teaching in the temple in Jerusalem, because he's given up that divine attribute. He also, in his humanity, gave up the divine attribute of what's called omniscience, the ability to know everything. But he only gave it up in his humanity. He did not give it up in his deity. In his deity, he must know it because he is God, and God knows all things. I hope that's not too complicated for you to understand. It's a bit like the Trinity, it takes a bit of understanding. For as in the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark. In other words, life was going on as normal until they entered into the ark. What he's telling you is that before the rapture, life is going to be going on as normal. How can you claim to believe in mid and post-tribulational years? In the Great Tribulation, life is going to be anything but normal. It's going to be a complete and total disaster. The world is falling apart. They knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Look at what it says in verse 4. Therefore be ye ready, for at such an hour as you think not, the Son of Man comes. People should stop predicting the date of the rapture. According to Ronald Fruchtenbaum, every time Jesus puts the date in his diary, some bright spark says, I think it's going to happen on that day, and Jesus rubs it out. Says, I told them it's not going to happen when they think it is. So don't keep predicting it. What people do is this, they say, I think the Lord's going to come again in the next 2 or 3 years. At the end of the 3 years, they say, I think the Lord's going to come again in the next 2 or 3 years. And they go on doing this, and 15 years later they're still saying the same thing, and people are believing them. It's very dangerous to make promises to people and for them never seeing them being fulfilled. The Jehovah Witnesses in the last century 4 times claimed that Jesus was going to come in a certain year. The last time was 1975. My brother was married to this lady called Frances, and she actually had a sister who was lame, and they knocked on her door one day and said, well, in 1976 Jesus will have come again and you won't be lame anymore. When it hadn't happened in 1976, 250,000 Jehovah Witnesses left the movement. The 4th time that they've been wrong. It's not a good idea to keep telling people things are about to happen. The same thing happened in the charismatic movement. In the charismatic movement, it wasn't the rapture, it was revival. Revival was always coming. For 14 years, I was in the charismatic movement, and revival was always on the tip of happening. Then after 14 years, the main leaders announced, revival is here. We've been telling you for years it's about to happen, and it's finally come. It turned out to be the Toronto blessing. It was the start of the death of that church. They got wackier and wackier, and the wackier they got, the more people joined the church. I don't know why they didn't put a notice up on the front door. If you're looking for a wacky church, come in here straight away. You can't get wackier than us. But after that, people finally actually started to leave. The last I heard about that church was they weren't even meeting regularly on a Sunday. They were just meeting in small house groups. They lost about 200 people. The time comes when people start to come to their senses and be saying, these people have been saying this for years and it never happens. We don't believe you anymore. If you turn to Deuteronomy 29, verse 29. If it does happen, then we're all in for a nice surprise. The secret things belong unto the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong unto us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of the Lord. Has the date of the rapture been revealed to us? No. It's a secret thing to us. If God wanted us to know the date of the rapture, he would tell us. People also say, oh, you can't know the hour of the rapture, but you can know the day or the month. When it uses the word hour there, it means time. You cannot know the time of the rapture. Most times the Bible talks about the hour, it is talking about time. Okay, so these are some of the reasons for a pre-trib view, which in my book make it almost certain the pre-trib view is obvious. The first is what Jesus taught in John 14. In John 14, Jesus actually had the second stage of the Jewish wedding in Lyne. There are 4 stages to the Jewish wedding. The first is what they call espousal or betrothed. We call it engagement. It's a lot stronger than our engagement. According to Matthew 1, verse 18, Joseph was espoused to Mary. But then it says that he thought of divorcing her. He would have actually had to have divorced her in order to break that engagement. You don't have to do that with engagements today. The second stage, the Jewish wedding, happens after the bridegroom gives the wife's father a price for the bride. Jesus did that. He gave God the Father the price of his blood for the bride. Now the bride can come into the bridegroom's house, which is heaven. The third stage of the Jewish wedding is the marriage itself, which will happen in Revelation 19. And the fourth stage is the marriage supper or the marriage feast, which according to Isaiah 25 is going to happen on Mount Zion at the start of the millennial kingdom. He's taken us through the 4 stages of the Jewish wedding. Once again, it points towards a pre-trib view of the rapture. He has to take us to his house. The bridegroom takes the bride to his house. Philippians 3 verse 20. For our conversation is in heaven, from whence also we look for the Saviour, the Lord Jesus Christ. We look for him, who shall change out of our bodies. That's the rapture that he changes it. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about that. We go from having corruptible bodies to incorruptible bodies. We're waiting for him. A man called Robert Grundy wrote a book in the 1990s called First the Antichrist. That's what the post-tribulationists, which is what he was, believe. You should be looking for the Antichrist. He's going to come first. This passage doesn't say that. It says you're supposed to be waiting for Christ. Luke 21, verse 36. Famous Olivet Discourse. There are things that Matthew and Mark tell you that Luke doesn't tell you, and there are things Luke tells you that Matthew and Mark don't tell you. Sorry, I lost my notes. Verse 36. Watch ye therefore and pray always that you may be considered worthy to escape all these things which will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. What things had he been talking about that they were supposed to pray to escape from? 2 different things. The first is in verse 20, when you see the Jerusalem's compassed with her armies, then know that her desolation is nigh. She was compassed with her armies in 67 AD, when the Roman commander Cestus Gallius surrounded Jerusalem with his armies. How can they get out? They were told to pray that they would escape. They can't escape. The Roman armies have surrounded Jerusalem. The supply lines were cut. They had no food. So they decided to retreat. And when they retreated, the most extreme form of the Zealot movement, the Zealots were a national party that were bent on killing the Romans, and frequently when they had the chance to do so, they would. The Sicarii were the most extreme people in the Zealot movement. They were the real fanatics. They always carried a dagger with them, and any chance they had to kill a Roman, they saw a Roman by himself, they would sneak up on him and kill him. They killed Cestus Gallius. The armies of Rome never came back to 69 AD. In that 2-year period, the Jewish Christians got out. They escaped to Pella in Jordan. They prayed that they would be able to escape. God gave them a way to escape, and they did. The second thing it goes on to talk about in verses 25 and onwards is the Great Tribulation. Pray that you will escape from the Great Tribulation. Not that you'll escape in it, but you'll escape from it. 1 Thessalonians 1 verse 10. And to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, even Jesus. Now this is how it reads in the Greek. The delivering us of the wrath that is coming. In other words, he's going to deliver us from the wrath that is coming. Now some people who don't like our viewpoints on the rapture say, that's talking about how he's going to deliver us from Gehenna, the lake of fire. No, it's not. He's already delivered us from that. He delivered us from that the day that we accepted him into our lives. If this meant that, he would say that he had delivered, not that he was delivering us or going to deliver. 1 Thessalonians 4 verse 18. After talking about the rapture, he says, wherefore comfort you one another with these words. If we're going through the Great Tribulation, how can we be comforted by the rapture? Roger Price used to say, it's like saying, I want to marry you, but first of all you've got to fight a 7-year war. I don't think the bride would be looking very forward for the wedding if she knew she had to fight for 7 years in a war first. This is a term of comfort for them. 1 Thessalonians 5, and Michael did touch upon this one. Verse 2, for you yourselves know perfectly the day of the Lord. The most common term used by the prophets is used by prophets like Zephaniah and Joel for the Great Tribulation. It cometh as a thief in the night. Well, first of all, how can it come as a thief in the night if the post-tribulation view is correct? Jesus said that nobody would ever know when the rapture would occur. He used the present tense, means continuous and ongoing action. But people will know when the rapture is going to occur if the post-tribulation view is right. At the start of the Great Tribulation, they would know that they've got to wait for 2,519 days before the second coming and the Great Tribulation happen. Or maybe they've got to wait for 1,259 days for the mid-trib view to happen. It will be possible then to know when the rapture is going to happen if the rapture happens at those times. But if the rapture is imminent, it can happen at any time as the pre-trib view teaches, then they can never know. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them. Well, they won't be saying peace and safety in the Great Tribulation. Then it goes on to say in verse 4, but you are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you as a thief, or surprise you as a thief. You are the children of the light and the children of the day. In Colossians 1 verse 12 it talks about how we've been delivered from the power of darkness. We've been translated into the kingdom of his dear Son. Therefore let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. For them that sleep in the night, and they that are drunken in the night. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet the hope of salvation. For God has not appointed us to wrath, but to attain salvation by our Lord Jesus Christ. We're not going to go through the wrath. God hasn't appointed us to those things. We're of the day. The night here is the evil and the Great Tribulation. Evil people going through the night because they embraced the night. Okay, once again, notice in verse 9 it talks about, verse 9, verse 11, it talks about comforting one another and building one another up because of these teachings. Now we turn to Revelation 3, verse 10. Because you have kept the word of my patience, I also will keep you from the hour of temptation. Once again, it means the time of temptation, which will come upon all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth. It's talking about the Great Tribulation. It's going to keep them from that time, not in it. People who become Christians in the Great Tribulation are not kept. They're dying all over the place. In Revelation chapter 6, you see an altar after the fifth seal that's happened in heaven, and they're all crying out for God to revenge them with the dwellers on the earth. They've been murdered by the dwellers on the earth. A lot of them were murdered, according to Revelation 17, by the false church that comes about in the first half of the Great Tribulation. In Revelation 7, they're up in heaven, and once again they are said to have come out of the Great Tribulation. In Revelation 11, the two witnesses are killed. In Revelation 20, it tells you about how lots of people were killed because they wouldn't take the mark of the beast. They wouldn't bow down to his image and do all the things that they were asked to do in the second half of the Great Tribulation. They're dying all over the place. They're not escaping it from it at all. We're escaping from it because of the pre-trib view of the rapture. Revelation 4 verse 1. Revelation 4 verse 1, after talking about the church for the first three chapters, it never talks about the church again to chapter 19. Revelation 4 verse 1 is a preview of the rapture. John is as if he's been raptured at that time, and he sees what's going to go on happening in heaven. And he keeps on talking about what's happening in heaven. When he does talk about the earth, he never once mentions the church. The church never again get mentioned until Revelation 19. By that time, the rapture is over. Revelation 19. Let us be glad and rejoice and give honour to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is Jesus, is come, is now present, and his wife shall make herself ready. Actually, it should say his wife has made herself ready, which means she's already been in heaven for a while. And to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white. For the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. And he saith unto me, Right, blessed are they which are called unto the marriage supper of the Lamb. That's the Old Testament saints and the people who died in the Great Tribulation. None of them are part of the church, but they are going to come to it because they are going to be part of the marriage supper. Matthew 8 verse 11 tells you that people come from the east and the west and will sit down with Abraham. When? At the marriage supper, the start of the millennial kingdom. And he saith unto me, These are the true sayings of God. If the church don't get raptured to the end of the Great Tribulation, and they come up to meet the Lord in the air, and then they go straight back down to the earth, how come they're in heaven in Revelation 19, getting married to Jesus? How come? How do you explain that if you believe in the post-tribulational view of the rapture? And yet people like David Paulson believe in that viewpoint. There's holes in it all over the place. Where is there ever a passage that teaches the church will be in the Great Tribulation? There isn't one. You don't have to prove that the pre-trib view is true. You have to prove that it's a reasonable view. It's a very reasonable view. In my opinion, it's the only reasonable view. You look at the evidence and you look at what is the most logical conclusion of the evidence. The most logical conclusion of the evidence, it seems to me, is clearly the pre-trib view of the rapture. And that's where I shall conclude tonight.